Seth Rollins revealed as the masked man on Bron Breakker at Royal Rumble. It was Seth Rollins the entire time. And the moment the mask came off, the moment the face underneath was finally visible to the entire WWE universe simultaneously, the wrestling world did not simply react with surprise. It reacted with the specific, electric, how did we miss this quality of a revelation that makes everything that came before it look different, that retroactively rewrites the understanding of weeks of television. That makes you want to go back to the beginning of the Masked Man story with this information and watch it again, because you know with certainty now that what you were watching was not what you thought you were watching. Seth Rollins was under the mask at Royal Rumble. Seth Rollins was the person terrorizing Bron Breakker. Seth Rollins was the force behind the coordinated attacks, the backstage ambushes, the masked army that Roman Reigns walked through, the entire operation that the wrestling world has been dissecting and theorizing about and arguing over in comment sections and fan forums and wrestling podcasts since the moment the first masked figure appeared on WWE programming. And the wrestling world is erupting right now in two completely different directions that are going to make this the most divisive comment section in the history of this channel. Because half of the people reacting to this reveal are absolutely losing their minds with excitement over what it means for Seth Rollins' story, for Bron Breakker's story, for the WrestleMania 42 implications of the most significant character revelation of 2026 WWE. The excitement is real and it is enormous and it is warranted. And the other half of the people reacting are pointing at the timeline and asking the question that the excitement is trying to drown out. If Seth Rollins was the masked man attacking Bron Breakker, if that was Seth Rollins underneath the mask during the weeks of the mystery, during the army ambush, during everything that the masked figure conducted, then how does Seth Rollins declaring war on Roman Reigns on March 14th fit? How does the man who was running a systematic, coordinated, weeks-long masked operation against Bron Breakker simultaneously have the bandwidth and the operational capacity to build the masked army that he deployed against Roman Reigns? That question is not going away. And this video is not going to let it go away. Because the wrestling world deserves the honest, complete, unflinching analysis of what Seth Rollins being the Royal Rumble masked man actually means. Not just the excitement. The full picture. And the full picture is more fascinating than the reveal itself. Buckle in. Let's start where the analysis needs to start, which is not with the mechanics of the revelation or with the question of how it fits the timeline or with any of the secondary implications that the reveal produces. Let's start with what the revelation tells you about who Seth Rollins is in 2026 and why the Bron Breakker operation was something that a person of Seth Rollins' specific character profile was capable of and, more importantly, motivated to conduct. Seth Rollins as the masked man is not a surprise if you have been watching Seth Rollins with the specific attention that his 2026 operating mode has been demanding. Because Seth Rollins in 2026 is a performer who has been gradually, quietly, with the kind of patience that his character does not always display, constructing something, building towards something. Moving pieces into position across multiple programs, across multiple personnel configurations, in ways that the individual pieces seem to not connect but that the reveal confirms were always connected. Bron Breakker represents something specific to Seth Rollins that makes the masked man operation comprehensible as more than tactical maneuvering. Bron Breakker is the future of WWE in the most visible, most physically undeniable, most institutionally affirmed way. He is the generational talent that WWE has decided to build its next era around. The combination of physical gifts and second-generation wrestling identity and legitimate competitive credibility that the company has chosen to invest in as its next central figure. Seth Rollins, who has occupied a specific position in WWE's competitive landscape for years, not quite the top of the top, always adjacent to the top, always in the conversation without quite being the answer the conversation was reaching for, has a specific and personal relationship with the concept of the generational talent who is going to define the next era. Because Seth Rollins has been in the category of performers about whom that specific description was never deployed. The masked man operation against Bron Breakker is Seth Rollins addressing the person who represents what Seth Rollins was never quite identified as. The future. The next era. The generational answer. Seth was always the present, the exceptional performer, the cannot be ignored individual talent. But never the future in the specific, institutional, company is building around this person's sense. Bron Breakker is that. And Seth Rollins put on a mask and spent weeks systematically dismantling Bron Breakker's sense of security, his composure, his certainty about who he is and what he is capable of, because the person who defines the future needed to encounter the specific, targeted, relentless intelligence of someone who understands exactly how to dismantle that kind of certainty. That is the character reading that makes Seth Rollins as the masked man not just plausible but inevitable in retrospect. Let's talk about the execution of the revelation at Royal Rumble, because the way a reveal is delivered matters as much as the content of the reveal itself. And the specific circumstances of the unmask, the setting, the moment within the Royal Rumble structure, the specific person who made it happen and how they made it happen are the details that determine whether the reveal lands as the series finale revelation it was designed to be or as a missed opportunity that the setup deserved better from. Royal Rumble as the venue for the Seth Rollins masked man reveal is the right venue in the specific way that the biggest reveals require the biggest stages. Not premium live events in general. Any premium live event could have technically hosted this moment. Royal Rumble specifically because of what the Royal Rumble represents in WWE's annual calendar. The event that officially opens the WrestleMania season. The event at which the people who are going to matter at WrestleMania declare their relevance through action rather than through announcement. Seth Rollins declaring his relevance to WrestleMania 42 through the unmask at Royal Rumble is the most efficient possible communication of the revelation stakes. It is not simply answering the mystery. It is simultaneously answering the mystery and establishing the WrestleMania program that the answer creates. The unmask is both the conclusion of the mystery story and the opening of the WrestleMania story. Two narrative functions delivered in a single moment. The moment within the Royal Rumble that the unmask occurred and the specific circumstances of how the revelation was forced, whether through direct confrontation or through someone pulling the mask, and if the latter, then who is the detail that determines where the power sits in the Rollins Breakker program going forward. If the mask was taken, if Bron Breakker or someone operating on Bron's behalf was the agent of the revelation, forced the unmask, physically remove the protection that the mask provided, then Breakker owns a piece of this moment. The revelation belongs to his agency as well as to the moment's narrative timing. If the mask came off through the Royal Rumble's own physical chaos through the specific entropy of 29 other people and the competition they generate, then the revelation is something that happened to Seth Rollins rather than something Seth Rollins chose to reveal, which changes the character reading again. Because a Seth Rollins choosing to reveal himself and a Seth Rollins being revealed against his intention are two completely different stories about where Rollins' control over this situation ends. Whichever version occurred at Royal Rumble, the wrestling world knows. And what it knows changes everything about what comes next between these two men. Let's spend real time on Bron Breakker's position in the aftermath of the Royal Rumble revelation because it is the most emotionally complex position a performer of his profile has occupied in WWE in 2026, and it deserves more than the standard "now he knows his enemy" treatment that the coverage is giving it. Bron Breakker has been living with a masked man for weeks. Has been operating in a professional environment where someone, an unnamed, unidentified, hidden behind anonymity, someone was conducting a systematic campaign against him, building pressure. Exploiting specific vulnerabilities in specific ways that required specific knowledge of how Bron Breakker operates, what his patterns are, where he is accessible, and what specific kinds of targeted pressure most effectively disrupt the specific kind of person he is. That someone being Seth Rollins changes everything about what the weeks of the Masked Man's campaign actually were. Because Seth Rollins' knowledge of Bron Breakker, the specific, experiential, competitor-to-competitor knowledge that a performer of Rollins' years and intelligence has acquired by sharing an operating environment with Bron, is not the knowledge of an outside adversary studying film. It is the knowledge of someone who has been in the same spaces, on the same shows, participating in the same competitive ecosystem that produced the specific version of Bron Breakker that the mask was targeting. Seth Rollins knows things about Bron Breakker that Bron may not know about himself yet. The specific competitive vulnerabilities that the Masked Man's attacks were targeting, the specific elements of Bron's composure and confidence and operating mode that were being systematically stressed, were targeted because Seth Rollins identified them as the elements most worth targeting. And Seth Rollins' identification of those vulnerabilities is the product of observation that Bron Breakker's own self-assessment has not had access to. The mask coming off does not eliminate those vulnerabilities. The revelation of the attacker's identity confirms that someone has mapped Bron's weaknesses with the specificity that only extended, intelligent observation produces. And that specific information that the person who knows where to hit Bron Breakker is Seth Rollins, the most analytically sophisticated competitive mind in WWE, is more frightening than any amount of anonymous physical threat. Bron Breakker knowing it is Seth Rollins is not relief. It is a different kind of fear. The specific fear of knowing that your enemy is smart. I promised at the beginning of this video that we were going to address the timeline question honestly. And here it is, because the wrestling community deserves the honest engagement with it rather than the dismissal that the excitement of the reveal is currently providing. Seth Rollins as the masked man who attacked Bron Breakker is the Royal Rumble revelation. Seth Rollins also declared war on Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar on March 14th with a masked army of his own. Seth Rollins was also, during the period of the Masked Man's operation against Bron Breakker, an active WWE performer on weekly programming with the specific schedule and the specific operational demands that active WWE performers carry. The timeline of Seth Rollins maintaining a masked operation against Bron Breakker while also having the capacity to build and deploy the masked army against Roman Reigns while also appearing on Raw and SmackDown as a featured performer, the timeline is full. More than full. It is the schedule of someone operating at a level of parallel operation that the wrestling world's logistics analysis has been noting since the March 14th declaration created the retroactive question. Here is the honest answer to the timeline question. Either the Masked Man operation against Bron Breakker and the Masked Army against Roman Reigns are sequential rather than simultaneous, with the Bron operation ending or being paused at a specific point and the Roman operation beginning subsequently, or Seth Rollins has an operational infrastructure supporting both campaigns that the public narrative has not yet mapped. Associates. Resources. The kind of coordinated support that makes parallel operations viable for a single strategist. The wrestling world needs to decide which of those readings is more consistent with everything the evidence provides. And the answer, whatever it is, changes the understanding of Seth Rollins as a character in 2026 more dramatically than any individual revelation could accomplish alone. Seth Rollins running multiple simultaneous operations against multiple significant targets, with the operational bandwidth to maintain all of them while appearing on television every week, is a version of Seth Rollins that is more frightening and more ambitious than anything the previous chapters of his career suggested he was capable of. If that is the Seth Rollins that 2026 contains, then WrestleMania season just got significantly more complicated for everyone on the roster. Seth Rollins vs. Bron Breakker at WrestleMania 42. The program that the Royal Rumble Unmasked has created is one of the most narratively rich WrestleMania programs available on the current card, and the richness is specific in ways that generic match preview coverage cannot capture. This is not a championship program, not in the traditional sense of two performers competing for a title that defines the stakes. This is a program about something more fundamental, about what professional wrestling's future is going to look like and who gets to have an opinion about it. About whether the generational talent who has been identified as the next era's defining figure can survive the specific, intelligent, experientially grounded challenge of someone who has been in WWE's main event conversation for long enough to know exactly what the next era's defining figure needs to encounter before the future can be theirs without qualification. Seth Rollins putting Bron Breakker through the masked man gauntlet was not cruelty, it was preparation. Seth Rollins' version of preparation, the preparation that a competitor of his specific intelligence and his specific relationship with this industry believes the future requires before it is ready to be the future. And the WrestleMania match is the examination. The formal, public, grandest stage examination of whether Bron Breakker, having been through the masked man operation, having had his vulnerabilities mapped and targeted and stressed, having found out at Royal Rumble who was doing it and why, is ready for the version of competition that readiness requires. The match is not Seth Rollins trying to stop Bron Breakker. It is Seth Rollins testing whether Bron Breakker deserves to be stopped. That specific framing of what the match is, the examiner and the examined, the present challenging the future to prove itself, as the most compelling match narrative WWE can tell at WrestleMania 42 between these two performers. And Seth Rollins being the masked man is what created the narrative's emotional foundation. Every week of the masked man's operation, every attack, every layer of the operation that was revealed as the mask came off. It was all the test beginning before the match was announced. WrestleMania 42 is the grade. Seth Rollins was the masked man at Royal Rumble. The revelation has changed everything about how 2026 WWE's mysteries are understood, how Bron Breakker's story reads retroactively, and how the WrestleMania 42 program between them is framed. I need every take in the comments right now. Were you one of the people who had Seth Rollins on your suspect list, and if so, what was the evidence that pointed you there? Does Seth Rollins as the masked man make his March 14th declaration of war against Roman Reigns make more sense or raise more questions, and how does this community resolve the timeline? And the question that defines where the wrestling world stands on this is Seth Rollins vs. Bron Breakker at WrestleMania 42, the most compelling generational story the current card contains, and when the match is over, does it confirm that Bron is ready or reveal that the test was not passable yet? Drop everything. Share this video immediately with every wrestling fan you know, because Seth Rollins being the Royal Rumble masked man is the most consequential character revelation in 2026 WWE, and this breakdown is the most complete analysis of what it actually means on every level. Subscribe to Wrestling News CC and activate every notification, because WrestleMania 42 is almost here, and when the Seth Rollins vs. Bron Breakker story delivers its conclusion, this community needs to be watching every second of it. It was Seth Rollins the entire time. And now that the wrestling world knows it, the only question is whether Bron Breakker can beat the man who spent weeks proving he knows exactly how to beat Bron Breakker. WrestleMania 42 is the answer. And the answer